I was getting ready to travel with Shannon to Leeds, England, for an academic conference on spiritualism. I'm not sure why really, but I felt this very strong pull to go. Part of it was because I wanted to know more about communication with the dead, but the other part of it was I wanted to feel safe while murking around in this area. And really, what could be more safe than a bunch of academics sitting around pontificating about the previous century's spirit phenomena? Welcome to The Extraordinary Project, Season 2, Episode 2. I'm Suzanne Clores. Leeds is a large metropolitan area in northern England. It's the home of stunning Victorian architecture, 3 large universities, and the Thackeray Medical Museum, which I was hoping to visit for a glimpse into Victorian-era medicinal history, back before they knew about germs. The conference was hosted by Leeds Trinity University's Center for Victorian Studies. The exact theme was the intersection of spiritualism and science. On the train, I had been thinking about how foreign this would all feel to me as an American, as a non-spiritualist. Like I'd be stepping into the past, into a time when the afterlife was almost tangible. Americans don't really believe in spirit communication anymore. I mean, some people do, but as a culture, we don't. But in the 1800s, it was almost the opposite. Spiritualism had a strong influence on psychology, politics, publications, and inspired a whole economy of mediums and magicians in the UK and the US. Almost like it was cool to be a spiritualist, to be someone who had the social status of regular contact with the deceased. What I wanted to know was, how did people explain what they saw, or thought they saw, in a seance? How on earth did it become safe to discuss spirits in polite conversation? The hotel was located in the outskirts of the city, and it was the kind of place where you wish you could take a nap and just sleep forever. Surrounded by old oak trees down a long driveway away from the road. I had been having some health issues, sleep problems actually, so although I tried to nap, it didn't take, and I went wandering around the hotel halls, which were cavernous, and although occupied by people, the hotel felt as empty as a hollow tree. I need to talk about the hotel for a minute. Built in the 1500s and of course updated, a beautiful contemporary estate. But it was dim with these long empty hallways, and I only saw people in the lobby, never coming in and out of rooms. Just now, as I was recording and figuring out how to explain that this hotel felt like it was alive, the audio software glitched as I was listening back, and this little breath sound replayed itself over and over like this. Like something was breathing. And that was it. That was exactly what I was trying to say. The hotel felt like it was breathing. This is the type of thing that starts happening when you're hanging around people who acknowledge the presence of spirits. An audio engineer would say, "Oh, that's just a glitch. It happens all the time." But a medium or a spiritualist would say, "No, that's a spirit trying to help you, trying to tell you that the hotel was breathing." So, okay. The hotel felt like it was breathing. Nothing terribly unusual happened in the hotel that night, besides the random electrical shortages and the peculiar ballrooms that were set up for hundreds of guests, but remained empty. The presence of the place grew on me. I bumped into one of my roommates in the lobby, the lovely woman from Liverpool who collects spirit voices via EVP, or electronic voice phenomena. If you don't remember what that is, maybe you remember Chappie from Season 1. Donna Sinclair Hogan had collected him with a tape recorder from an old church. Now we were sharing a room together. And before you think, "Oh, Suzanne, that's not a good idea," I just want to share something I've learned since starting this project, which is that people who work with spirit voices or spirit phenomena aren't easily overtaken by their material. So what this means is, over time, I've learned to trust that people who work in this world know what they're doing. In fact, my roommates felt more like protectors to me, almost like they had a more specialized immune system, attuned to the paranormal. I know that sounds weird, but a psychic immune system is a real thing. It protects you from things like terror. That said, I did not sleep well that first night. Day 1 of the conference taught me 2 things. The first was that spiritualism was kind of an in thing to study. It had captured the curiosity of academics all across Europe, from France, Belgium, Norway, Hungary, Ireland, all of whom had researched the practice, the publications, the social class, the artwork, and none of whom really addressed the question of their own belief, which I thought was interesting. Because why would you spend 8 years on a PhD on this particular topic if your passion wasn't personal in some way? The second thing I was starting to see was an answer to my question of how it became socially acceptable to talk about spirit phenomena in polite conversation. It was partly because the scientists and the philosophers of the day were talking about it, and that made it okay for everyone else. For example, Sir Oliver Lodge, a physicist in the 1800s who discovered radio waves, had written a thick, detailed book called Raymond about his deceased son's communication with a medium. Lodge first coined the term ether in this book. Details about his son seemed to come from an ethereal realm. These long seance sessions became proof of the afterlife. The mediums themselves became a type of evidence as psychical research rippled across Europe. A Hungarian chemist, Elmer Csengery Pap, was also interested in the new promising field of psychical research, and in the early 1900s, he found and tested a medium gifted in the art of teleportation, as in objects moving from one place to another without human interference.
It was an interesting episode of early parapsychology in Hungary. These early spiritualists wanted to conduct objective experiments.
This is psychology scholar Julia Gimesi talking about Csengery Pap's experiments and mission.
Elmer Csengery, he was originally also a spiritualist, but later on he became more and more disappointed with this religious spiritualistic background, and he found an outstanding medium called Lajos Pap, and he was extremely good in this occult phenomena.
So Csengery Pap and this medium would be in the seance room with other curious observers, and throughout the course of the seance, various objects would appear in the seance room without anyone moving them manually. Gimesi shared with me an exhaustive list of apports.
Food, flowers, pebble stones, cartridges, coins, pins, water, wine, beer, coffee, honey, perfume, cigarettes, dead animals and animal residues appeared in the laboratory, insects, butterflies, a skull of a dog, birds, fishes, frogs, living animals like crickets, stag beetles, butterflies, flying adders, millers, worms, a frog, crayfish, goldfish, lizards, newts, snails, 4 turtles, 3 Japanese dancing mice, and 2 goldfinches.
Csengery Pap was very strict with controls and had a lot of rules in the seance room. But still, this list of apports is kind of outrageous and hard to believe. Gimesi wanted me to know that she was not so much dealing with the question of the reality of these apports.
My main aim is to show that early phenomena of Western esotericism were important and often interconnected with early psychological thinking.
And it's still interconnected, even though most of Csengery Pap's colleagues in the Society of Psychical Research doubted this apport evidence. They all continued to pursue what we still know today as the hard question of consciousness. Sir Oliver Lodge and Csengery Pap were trying to forge a path into the unknown, a path that illusionists and magicians have been walking for a long time. As it turns out, magicians and illusionists were still seduced by spiritual seances. In fact, 2 had come to the conference to perform. Most seances were wrapped up with performance, and this one was no exception. But there was a nervous energy in the auditorium, and it wasn't only coming from me. We filed into the dark auditorium and were guided to our seats. Silver skeleton keys tied with strings were lying on the desks. I reached out to touch my key. "Don't touch anything," the top-hatted magician told me, "for your own safety." The two illusionists took the stage. I think some dramatic music played, but I'm not sure. It was a mock seance, but stepping into this dark, alternative space distorted my senses. We were told to call in our spirit guides, ask them to swirl around the perimeter of the auditorium to protect us from any ill-intended beings. The rest of the room went silent, and I felt a little bit sick and claustrophobic. We were asked to hold hands and close our eyes, and I heard a woman a few chairs away from me chuckle. But when we opened our eyes and watched the seance unfold, the room felt spellbound. The magicians told a story, then created a situation on stage that needed participants. A water glass slid across the table without human interference. We held up our amulets on command and watched whether or not they swung in response to the spirits. I felt cold and then hot. I knew I was safe, but I kept wondering what would happen if I made my way to the exit, if I could make my way to the exit. I did make it to the exit, found a glass of water, and at lunchtime I spoke to the magicians, Ashton Carter and Nick Taylor. They have been practicing what they call bizarre magic and recreating seances for 10 years.
So in the UK, we have a thing called Doomsday, which is where some of the world's greatest bizarre magicians and storytellers come and meet for a weekend.
We met and we discussed the work we were doing. We found we had a lot in common, and so we started collaborating.
A typical performance, I think, would be a 2-hour show where we will start off with some gentle bizarre magic, storytelling, some ghost stories, and then we'll move into a recreation of a seance, and we'll use some very old techniques to summon the spirits and let people experiment and imagine and experience what it would have been like for their great-great-grandparents.
They love their work as bizarre magicians and seance reenactors, but consistently, they trigger a lot of feelings with their audience members. Some believe their divination and seance services so thoroughly, they start treating Nick and Ashton as though they were mediums.
The moment it first happened, I was really taken aback. I was doing 3 shows in one evening, and the final evening, this person I think had a little bit to drink came up to me and said, I need you to interpret my dreams, I need you to see this. And also someone else offered me a job contacting spirits. Between you and me and the podcast, yes. I hid in the toilets until everyone left.
Eventually, he came out of the toilet and declined the job offer. But questions like this come up quite a lot, and they have had to draw very clear ethical lines.
Because the thing that I find very difficult is the exploitative, fraudulent medium. These are the people that go out and exploit people's grief. And that sits uncomfortably. So when someone came to me and legitimately asked, can you get in touch with my mother? So that's not the sort of medium I am. So I always term myself as a performer. But of course that ambiguity is very powerful. I always in my seances explain at the start that I cannot contact people in the rooms departed. I can't. But you have to confront that thing if you're doing what we're doing.
Certainly with the seance work, that kind of recreation, you can confront that. Sometimes, despite what you do, people will still believe. And I think, certainly for myself, I'm very happy with that ambiguity.
We talked for a long time about how that ambiguity is a necessary part of people's lives. How walking that line between true and false was almost a human need. How, as entertainers, they were providing a service by creating that space for people to ponder, wonder, experience their own responses to the unknown. But they didn't seem to be having any unintended consequences from their work, at least not like the sleep problems I was having. I went back to the hotel early, took a bath, met people for dinner, and stayed up as late as I could in hope of falling asleep. I hadn't told anyone about my sleep problems, but I was starting to wonder if my roommates were looking at me strangely, if they somehow knew. The easiest way to explain the sleep problems is this. I had developed a special case of night terrors called hypnagogia, which means fear in the state between sleep and wake. Ordinary night terrors are terrible. They're a type of nightmare that happen in the REM sleep state, and they have characteristics that are consistent across cultures and centuries. Extreme fright, or terror, combined with immobility at the sight of a figure in your room. A human figure, a spider, a snake, a monster, sitting on your bed or pressing up against your body, crushing you. Usually one wakes up screaming from a night terror because the creatures are still in the room, and you can't move, which is why it's so terrifying. The technical name for the syndrome is sleep paralysis, but in my case, I didn't always experience paralysis. My hypnagogic terrors had been coming chronically a few times a week for the last year. Bugs on my arms, spider fragments on my face, a pulsating black anemone on my throat. I'd wake up disturbed and have trouble falling asleep, again and again. Then, in the last few months, thankfully, the hallucinations have changed. Now they're a little more social. They involve people. As I'm falling asleep, I hear people talking, or laughing, or having deep discussions, or loud parties like a family reunion. This would happen a few times a night. The sound would wake me up before I could drop into a deep rest. It was like trying to sleep at a college party. Then, a few months later, as I was falling asleep, the sounds became visual. They weren't people I knew, and sometimes they weren't people from this century. They would be dressed in scarves or ornate jewelry, or sometimes masks. They might be looking at me, or they might get really, really close to my face. And that's when I would wake up in a screaming panic. You can imagine how this would get old after a while, but I hadn't been able to find a good solution. I was in a bad pattern of closing my eyes, drifting into hypnagogia, and then screaming. My husband would wake up, calm me down, and we'd start the whole cycle again. I tried to have better sleep hygiene, going to bed earlier, not eating a big meal or drinking coffee or having sugar or alcohol before bed. But the truth was, part of me was really worried that my work was causing the disorder and that I was slipping into a place I couldn't get out of. In the morning, Donna, the voice collector, asked me how I had slept. And right then, I knew that I must have been screaming in the night. She said it was more like muttering and talking, and when I described to her the experience I was having, she just sort of nodded knowingly and said, "Sometimes, when a medium is waking up to her abilities, this is how it starts." Maybe it was the way that she said it, but instead of dread, I felt a wave of calm pass over me. Not because I believed or didn't believe, more like I had gotten an answer to a question I didn't know how to ask, and suddenly the whole trip to the conference made sense. I had been telling myself two narratives about the cause of these night terrors, neither of which drew a very positive picture. A, I was having some kind of psychological break, or B, my body was breaking down. In both cases, I was telling myself that I would never sleep normally again, and I knew now that that wasn't the whole story. Was I becoming a medium? I had no idea, but the question got me thinking about alternative health narratives and how one shift in story can change your entire perspective on living. Next time on The Extraordinary Project. The Extraordinary Project was created by me, Suzanne Clores, audio engineering and sound design by Malika Gumpangam, and musical compositions by David Weiner. Special thanks to Bizarre Magicians Nick Taylor and Ashton Carter of the UK, and to psychology professor and department chair Julia Gimesi of Pázmány Péter Catholic University in Budapest, Hungary. If you like The Extraordinary Project, tell all your friends, and you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Suzanne S. Clores, or on Facebook at Suzanne Clores' The Extraordinary Project. Until next time.